me about one little mistake, one thing I'm saying a little bit off, and I was always, because he was the most easygoing guy you can imagine. We all know that. But if you say over his teachings or you sing his songs the wrong way, whoa, 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 whoa.
No, not only me, that happened to him.
So yeah. So I had the privilege many times of being corrected, and I'm still hearing the corrections. And so I just, on one level, and the reason, and it wasn't just because this is my way of doing it. It was much deeper than that, my dear friends. It was because, first of all, as you always said, he channeled from a higher source, and this is the way he heard it, so he felt we should respect that higher energy. But I think when he was saying, when he was speaking, when he was telling stories, when he was singing, his music is so simple, but so profound. You get into it, and you can just feel the depth growing upon you, and you hear simple teachings of his, and the infinite applications you can have in life, and the infinite truths you see in it, that it is so easy to see Shlomo in your narrow way, and to just hear the narrow melody that speaks to you, which is all beautiful. But it's also easy to misunderstand him that way, because as much as he was a simple person, he was a deeply, I'll say the word in a holy way, complex person. And he channeled infinite energies. In a few minutes I'll talk about just some of his early influences, and you'll see the broadness of where he was coming from. That I think, to really do him justice, I always say people will misunderstand what I'm saying, and they'll get it wrong a little bit. Still better to put it out into the cosmos, but as simple as it is for me to speak about him, it is equally difficult, you see what I'm saying, because of the multifaceted broadness of who he was and what his message was, and how he channeled and connected so many different energies. The layers of his understanding. He could tell the same story 20 times, and even tell it the same way 20 times. And many times he did. And you can still learn 30 different applications from them, and you could see him applying it infinitely different ways at different times. So it's the same words, the same story, the same essence, the same spirit, but the message today is not the message that it was yesterday. He used to always say, the great question in life God wants you to ask every moment is, what does God want of me in this moment? Really in this moment. Because in the next moment, God wants something so radically different from me, so the opposite of what he wanted a minute ago. I'm in a whole new zone, a whole new spirit. And the moment after that, forget it. Continues. So his Torah of the moment, we learned Ishbitz a few days ago, based on Ishbitz, is really tuning into the power of what does God want of me at this moment. So whenever I teach him, I just always pray that I can say him in a simple, clear, and yet broad enough way that people can begin seeing the multi-layered aspects of what he's trying to communicate. And Sarah Leah asked me to share with you my own first encounter with him, which was heavenly, really, in every sense of the word. I just moved from Baltimore to New York, and before BJ, the way you know it now, famous synagogue.
Tell them your background so they know where you're coming.
Further back.
Just a little bit, so they know who you are.
No, it's cool. We'll go back. Okay. My parents were Holocaust survivors. Came from small towns in Poland, Cheshinev. My mother's from a little town, and my father's from also a little town called Tichin, and the bigger city is Jezero. Anyway, and they came to Baltimore, and they wanted to maintain the old ways, And there was a little cheder, which is like an old world kind of school, where they would teach us in Yiddish the entire Torah. Whatever we would study would be in Yiddish, the way it was taught in the old world. And that was their undoing. They were too religious. So for secular studies, they had to send me to another school called TA in Baltimore. And while at Sheres HaPleita, which means the survivors, the leftovers of pre-war Jewry, they had their own little yeshiva for their students. secular studies was out of the question, but we needed it. They knew that. They were open-minded enough, but that wasn't their thing. They knew what they were good at. They weren't going to try to act like they knew English when they didn't. So for secular studies, they sent us to TA. So in Sheresh HaPleita, I'm living in a world that's all with payas and very Haredi, what we call today, and very frum and very old worldly like. And in TA, I'm coming to a school where 90% of the kids don't keep Shabbat. And the Gemini in me just came fully alive. You know, whoa. I'm able to see worlds, you know. And the rest is history, you know. And the rest is I'm here. So it was really those early days where I sort of sought multiple worlds and multiple layers of worlds that began opening me up, that when I met Reb Shlomo, I saw him once or twice just from a distance, but when I really met him, which was Purim night, for the first time, and there couldn't be a better night to meet him than Purim, as you can imagine. When I met him Purim night, I was reading Martin Buber, and I was struggling, who am I, who is thou, and how do I get the I, thou thing right?
How old were you?
I was 18. I just come out of yeshiva.
And did you get your smicha at that point?
No, that came much later. At that point, I was working as a, you're brilliant, you gotta interview me. At that point, I was working to support myself. I worked as a Rebbe in a Hebrew school, in a cheder. Not as a Rebbe, as an English teacher. They were already more modern then. They saw how I got corrupted, so they said in Borough Park, hey, we could have our own secular studies. We can't send them to different schools. So this was in a Hasidic place called Skver, one of the most, I don't want to use the word right-wing in a bad way, but it is one of the most zealously holy right-wing, and sometimes a little bit off too, I guess. We all make mistakes. So it was their satellite in Borough Park, which is a holy city unto itself. I was born in Baltimore. I moved to Borough Park at that point. And to support myself, I taught English studies there. A year before, I was the other side of the desk as a student, and it was a major cultural adjustment to be the one that has to enforce. And I was just warned by the principal that the year before I taught that class, they had 6 teachers in a matter of 2 months. So I realized I'm not going to be the tough teacher because I don't know how to do that, and they'll just tear me apart anyway. So I was studying Maimonides then. Maimonides said something so beautiful. He said one of his explanations of the world to come is that, you know, God, so to speak, is giving us candies, giving us sweets, healthy sweets, sweets that really sweeten our soul. And he wants us to come to Torah through sweetness, through love, through the positive message, through its holy sweetness, I'll say. The ways of the Torah have to be sweet. If it's not sweet, it's not Torah. And that's what it means that they're sitting in heaven and enjoying all the sweet delicacies, because it's sweet delicacies that we need to connect to when we learn Torah. And I started giving out sweets, like I took them out to play ball with them for half the period if they behaved for the other half. We played color war, and I got them to, debate each other and give out points for good behavior, and a variety of sweets that I knew would resonate with them, and I survived a whole year, another 5 years as a teacher in the school system. But anyway, with that, when this is not about me. So I was coming from that world, and I was studying at a yeshiva then for just post-high school Talmudic studies. I'd learned in Eretz Israel previously in Baltimore, and then there was this yeshiva opened up in Borough Park where I was living called Derech Chaim, so I was learning there. And then I was going to college at night.
But you got your smicha from Derech Chaim?
No, from Shlomo and from Kol Yaakov, which is many years later.
That's okay.
Many years later. First I was learning to learn.
Okay.
And I'm in that world right now, just having moved to New York and busy with all these 3 different and multiple tasks, and my mom, my family, and I hear Shlomo Carlebach is doing a Purim concert at B'nai Jeshurun, which is now called BJ, the famous synagogue you all are familiar with in the Upper West Side. And at that time, it had a very kind of old world conservative rabbi. It was very contemporary, but not the happy, clappy conservative Judaism that we know today. It was more philosophical, more intellectual. And am going to this concert for Purim night, and this rabbi sitting at a desk with a very serious look and notes this thick, and he asks Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach the deepest philosophical questions about life. And Reb Shlomo starts off by saying, Rabbi Barkowitz, you always ask me the deepest questions in the world. And then he'd go l'chaim, and then he would maybe sing a melody. And then he would begin to dialogue with him and really eventually answer the question on a very down-to-earth, very this worldly level too. And then he would get us dancing again. And then, of course, there was this thing that the stage couldn't accommodate more than 5 dancers. And 100 of us jumped up on stage. And the dancing was like wild. And the teachings were like soul-touching, I mean, really deep. And I looked out at the audience and I saw a view I'd never seen in my life before, coming from my little world in Baltimore, having just moved to Borough Park. I saw Hasidim of every stripe. I saw Jews of every denomination. I saw human beings of every color and race. There weren't that many Purim shows in those days. And there were like 2,000 people there, packed to the rafters. And I knew he's talking only to me. He's talking about the old world, the beauty of the world that once was, and the beauty of the world that is right now, and the beauty of the world that one day will be again. And I'm hearing those words and I said, whoa, this is I thou. I didn't know anybody else was there, but he was talking to me. And I felt, as Buber said, the two-way flow and the I thou connection. Yeah, man, go, keep on going, keep on saying, keep on teaching. My soul was crying, you know, and my face was smiling and dancing. And I heard the world of my great-grandparents communicated in a way that I should only be blessed, all of us be blessed, to communicate to our great-grandchildren in a way that I knew they could understand it because it so resonated with me, it's so connected with me. And that moment I knew I met my Rebbe. I knew the past, present, and future had merged in this I-thou dialogue, so to speak. And forever I was thankful to Rabbi Berkowitz for all the deep questions he asked and for creating this opportunity Purim night. And that's when I first met Shlomo Purim night. And then I evolved and had different follow-up meetings with him, which I want to go more into him, so I'm not going to take up too much time on that. But it was life-altering. I knew that night that I met my master and that my life had changed. You know, there was no question about it, because I was seeking, yearning, wanting to connect. The old world was beautiful to me, but it was painful too, and it was a hard old world, and it was an enforced old world, but I knew there was sweetness in it. And the new world looked like a little bit dangerous to me, but beautiful and tempting too. And he sort of made it all blend so beautifully. He was hip, he was cool, he was traditional, he was a chassid, and he was a man of the future, and so rooted in the present. So it's what I was hungry for, you know. And Shlomo used to say it so beautifully, if you're hungry for food, your stomach is empty. But if you're hungry for God, whoa, are you filled with godliness? It's a Reb Nachman teaching, actually, Nachman of Breslov. And I guess my hunger was just, you know, within me stirring, and when you found the connection, it was like, whoa, this is the real thing, this is it. This is how we bridge worlds. This is how the present and the past and the future can all be in dialogue with each other. And as I got to know him and connect deeper with him, so I was studying political science in Brooklyn College, then had the most liberal, Marxist, radical leftist professors you can imagine. Michael Harrington at Queens College was another great influence. And he was taking me to that world and then some. He was seeing the equality and the beauty that it was being painted in the secular world for me, but with real spirit, with real meaning. And not a forced equality, not a theoretical equality, but an equality where everybody is in the circle together, singing and dancing and learning and connecting to the depth of the realness of life, which doesn't make a difference if you're the wealthiest person in the room or the poorest schlepper in the room. Our needs on an inner level are all the same, you know. And so what I was learning in college all of a sudden became elementary. And being with him was really post-college, postgraduate work. And I was blessed that after a few years of hanging with him, I did a little program for him once in Brooklyn where I lived in Borough Park, and he kind of liked it, and he said to me, "Hey brother, I need a manager." And so there were like 10 people in the room while we were talking in his bedroom, and he said, "Come here, I'll tell you. I give you 20%, do your own expenses, and you mail everything, and be my manager." And and that was it. And I just, the way I looked at it is I was being subsidized for my studies, because I was able to fly with him. I had a normal daytime job. I worked for the New York City Council at that point, and whenever I can schedule vacations, like Lincoln and Washington weekend, birthdays came a week apart in those days. There was no President's Day, and I would usually go to California with him then for 2 weeks and only lose 4 or 5 days at work, and traveled with him for weekends all over, and of course to Israel and the Soviet Union and Poland. I'll get to that later. But it was all studying Torah, studying the depth of Torah, studying the living Torah, studying Torah from a master who really was engaged in the depth of the oral tradition. The Baal Shem Tov is said to have said, when he saw a student taking notes once, "What are you writing? What are you writing?" He said, "What I'm saying is one thing. What you're hearing is a second thing. What you're putting down on paper is a third thing. And what you'll read one day later will be a fourth thing yet." And so, I can share memories and thoughts, but they're already a little bit missing in the essence of the Torah of the moment that I saw, with him. And that Torah is non-recordable. That is the oral tradition. That's why the rabbis were so against recording and writing down the oral tradition, because it needs to be passed on in an oral way with the oral essence, and it needs to sort of connect to your soul in the moment. It's the story that's alive forever, And I want to just really start, so coming into my little take on him, by saying that I really, almost his pre-birth consciousness foretold his life story. I'm sure Sarah Leah knows the story well. You may have heard it somewhere. But his mother had twins. And it was natural birth, and it was at home. And Shlomo was lying in a position where the doctor told Shlomo's father that if that baby's not going to move in a few minutes, in order to save the mother's life and the other babies, I would call it, he would have to do something very drastic. I'll just leave it at that. And Shlomo's father said to him, in German, Shlomo said, "Wie viel Minuten geben Sie Gott zu machen Wunder?" How many minutes are you giving God to do a miracle? He says, "Haben Sie 7 Minuten." You got 7 minutes. And Shlomo said he was later told his father and mother just began praying and saying, "God, save this child. This child will be dedicated to you day and night." And after 6 minutes, just in time, the baby moved. Shlomo came out, and half an hour later, Avichaim came out. And I don't think this is, of course, not just metaphoric, but it's real. It's the living Torah, Shlomo's life story is to make room for the other. And that's the life force that kept him going, that gave him his mission, that gave him his vision. Is to teach us how to make room for the other, to literally give his life to make room for the other. And he said that it was drilled into my head from the earliest moments of consciousness that I have to do something with my life that thanks God for the great miracle that he gave me. And I have to connect to God in a way that's life-altering as my situation was, life-saving. So I would argue the true origin of Shlomo probably has an earlier origin that we don't know, maybe an epigenetic one, I don't know, I'm not going to analyze it, but just the one that we do know is a pre-birth. Kadesh Mebeten Imo, he was holy back in the womb yet, doing holy work. And his parents, had such powerful influence on him, His mother was a very strong woman. If any of you saw the show, you saw her represented a little bit. But she was filled with kindness and caring and wanting to help and feeding. She was such a kind woman. Shlomo said on her deathbed, she was raising money for a yeshiva that was, the financial future was threatened, the Panovich yeshiva. She sold her jewelry to save that yeshiva. She was making infinite fundraising calls, you know. So while she was a tough, strong woman, you know, she was obviously deeply loving, deeply compassionate. His father's softness and sweetness, Shlomo said, my father would walk down the street and his charisma would be flowing head to toe. So this is his earliest consciousness, Holy Father and Mother, that are introducing him into the world, you know. Just since Rebbe Ela said we should talk about Pesach, I'll share with you a short Reb Shlomo story about his dad that I think is very telling in terms of the kind of family he came from, but is telling on what a rabbi is supposed to do and how we really are supposed to get ready for Pesach. He said his father was rabbi in Berlin, and at that point, and he gets a letter from somebody who's in the army saying, please write the High General that I want to come home because I want to bake matzahs and make Pesach ready for my family. And I need to bake matzahs or else we're not going to have Pesach. I want to come home 2 weeks earlier. Shlomo's father says to himself, the High General could care less. Germany's in a war right now and this little Yiddish needs to bake matzahs and they're going to, can I go in and talk to him? But in Shlomo-like way, his father said, you know, if the letter came to me, it means it's my calling of the moment. So I got to try. If I fail, I'll fail. Chances don't look good, but I got to try, you know. I heard the story from Shlomo in Poland when we were sitting in a beautiful home like this in the home of the American Consul General, and he was just sharing this story that moment, I remember. And he submits his name. He goes into the military headquarters and submits his name, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, and he wants to speak to the general, so to speak, in charge of making these decisions to give a Jew an exemption. And he submits his name. And he figures, you know, it takes a sefer along, it's going to take days till he's going to hear from anybody, but he'll do his studies here. There were no cell phones, so he couldn't do any other work at that point. No distractions. 10 minutes later, they come back and say, the High General is ready to see you, Rabbi Carlebach. Whoa, you know, couldn't believe his ears. He comes in, and the High General stands up and says, are you the son of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach from Lübeck, Germany? He says, yeah, that's my father. I'm the youngest son. He says, know one thing. Whatever you ask for is already granted. But before I hear what you need, I want you to hear what I heard from your father. He said, I went to the funeral of one of the greatest Jewish barons who supported, I guess, the German Kaiser or whoever the German leader at that time was, and was a close, trusted aide. And this man was a total assimilated German secular Jew. To keep the story short, he happened to have met Shlomo's dad through a variety of circumstances and was so taken by his charisma that he developed what we call today a rabbi relationship with a Jew who's not into the Torah world. And the rabbi, as Rabbi Sammy does, connects with people and studies, and he started studying with him a little bit and just encountering him. And then when this elder baron died, he left in his will that he wants Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, this is Shlomo's grandfather I'm talking about now, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach to do the funeral. I'm making it short because we have so much ground to cover. So he said, when your grandfather got up to speak, he says, I'm a general. I am trained to be hard as a rock. I am trained to be as tough as they come. And if I ever let up for 1 minute, I know I'm not serving my superiors. I'm not doing my job. But in the 10 minutes that your grandfather spoke, not only did I not have my tears, not only that it was my eyes not wet with tears, but I was crying and gushing. My heart was opened like never before. I never knew I had a soul, but I felt my soul. That man touched me with the way he spoke, with the feeling, with the depth, with the understanding of just a eulogy of what a man was and the way he gave over that man's story. I saw an outpouring of soul for the first time in my life. I'll never forget it, and for the rest of my life, I still put on that hard outer facade of being a strong, tough general that what we call in America is a tough wasp, will never be moved. But I'm moved. My heart has been broken open. So I'm ready to sign whatever you need. And this matzah man, came home to his family. So again, this is the kind of family he was born into. And just some of his early influences, I was with him in Vilna, in the Soviet Union, and he did 2 concerts there. And I remember he was just sharing with me how he met people. Shlomo would go to a concert. If there were 20 people there or 2,000 people, he would shake every hand. His concerts always started late because he was the distraction. He was the reason why they couldn't start on time. He was just hugging and shaking and connecting and smiling at every person, going over and greeting every individual. And there were some people in the room who told him they drove 5 hours from a town far from Vilna called Shavel. And that just pushed a button deep in him. And he remembered the great Shavla Gaon, the great rabbi of Shavla, who used to come to his house to vacation and to spend some time there. And the Shavla Gaon wanted nothing more than to take Shlomo to his yeshiva because he saw the promise of what Shlomo was. He was but 10 years old, and he was packed and ready to go, but his tough, wise, loving mother wouldn't let him leave. And he was like, for the rest of his life, never forgiving himself what opportunity he lost had he been able to learn with the Shavla Gaon. Just to give you a sense of who he was, one of the greatest Torah giants of Lithuania, which was the center of Torah study at that point, more than Poland and the rest of Russia. Scholarly level, definitely the top of the top. Calling it Harvard and Yale and is not enough. People were sitting and studying Torah there on the highest level. This man was a brilliant mathematician. He was invited to conventions all over the world to speak about his mathematical theories. When you studied math, in the moments you're not allowed to study Torah when you go to the bathroom. And he just, his mind was always connecting to God, and math is God's manifestation as Torah is. But Gemara just tempted him that he couldn't stop studying the Talmud. And so again, hearing Shlomo speak about the Shavla Gaon and what might have been, and another part of his life that could have enhanced his life, and I say to myself, imagine if, God forbid, that baby had moved a minute later, or had not moved the minute it moved. Imagine how radically different the world would be. Imagine the great loss we would have had. God forbid. So Shlomo was looking back at the loss that he had, but just integrating the personalities that he met. He met this young man who, his name, he said, was Matis German, who grew up in an assimilated home in Vienna, and went to a academy and was a top student there, won a spelling bee. And as soon as he won the spelling bee, it was not too much before 1939, we're talking, so he was called Dirty Jew. And this pure little innocent kid who was so happy for having excelled just was so broken, he ran out of the school crying. And he figured, the only place I can run to and find out what a dirty Jew is like is run into the ghetto. And he'd never been there, he grew up in an assimilated home, but he ran into the Jewish quarter. And he happened to be passing by a hotel where he saw thousands of Jews gathered. A great rabbi had arrived. Rabbi Shapiro, who was a founder of a brilliant yeshiva in Lublin, Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, who was a member of parliament in Poland, was a brilliant man in infinite ways. And he was visiting there. And he ran, and as he was walking down the steps, aides were accompanying him, and this little boy ran right up to him and said, "Rabbi, is it true the Jews are dirty?" By the will of God, you know. And Rabbi Shapiro had a major meeting to go to, went back into the hotel room, sat with this little boy. All we know is this little boy didn't return to the gymnasium in Vienna. His parents allowed him to go to Rabbi Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro's yeshiva was the top yeshiva. In order to enter that yeshiva, you needed to have excelled in infinite other yeshivas. There were only a few hundred students that made it from all of Eastern Europe to be able to study at any given time. Within a short time, he was one of its top students. Within a short time, he was the top aide of the greatest Hasidic Rebbe of that time, the Ger Rebbe. And he lived in Vienna, and he played soccer with Shlomo. And he'd come to Baden and play soccer with the kids. And he'd say, and he was very athletic. And he'd say, "This is so much fun, football. But I want to tell you something else that's a lot of fun." You take them in and start studying Torah with them. Depth and sweetness of the Torah. He perished in the Holocaust in the saddest way. I don't want to share it right now. We don't have the time to. But during the Holocaust, I'll just leave it positive and say he organized a group of young Jewish people who were underground. Last night I spoke about partisan underground that did holy work. This was a Jewish underground that went from ghetto to ghetto and just kept Jews in contact with each other, told them what was happening in other towns, and organized Torah studies in ghettos, in camps. The Nazis haunted them. Eventually they found him, and him and his whole group were very sadly and tragically, of course, annihilated. And I'll just give you the punchline. He asked, and I'm skipping because the hours, what time is it? Give me a sense. I should have a watch in front of me.
2:55.
Oh my God. So, wait, almost halfway through. So, and I haven't even started. So, so we'll get to, I just want to finish this one thing quickly just to give you a sense again of the power of these souls. So he asked, this Matis German asked the German officer, before they were going to kill them all, he said, by international law, and you know it, you abide by it, we have a right to one last request. We want prayer books and prayer shawls before you execute us. And of course the Germans are very cultured, and they abide by rules of law, you know, with their beast-like behavior. So they found Talatim, and they found prayer books. And they began singing, Nishmat Kol Chai. May the soul of every living being bless God in God's name. And they kept on going through the entire prayer, 100 souls singing and screaming on the top of their lungs, knowing these are their last words to God, screaming and singing with their whole being head to toe. The German head officer said, "Stop them fast. Give me the gun right now. If they continue for one more minute, I'll melt." And he wouldn't let them finish. One survivor fell a second early and faked being dead and lived to tell the story. So the power of good, we say Adelo Yada Purim, that good can overpower, Amalek overpower evil. There are infinite holy stories of that magnitude that Shlomo was blessed to be a channel, really, to connect to all these souls and to hear their story and to take the old world and transmit it to us. So I say speaking about Reb Shlomo is so difficult for me because it's so easy. But to get the broadness of his message, which I'm going to get to in a minute, is so difficult. Because his message is rooted in the shtetl, but it's meant for the world. It's meant for humanity. But it's meant not to lose one iota of the holiness of the holy shtetl, the beauty of the holy shtetl, but to create that true global village that embodies the depth of what holiness can be, of what love really is when it's divine-oriented, divine-based. So I don't want to just, some people have said, yeah, Shlomo is very easy to go to, Whatever you want, you can see in him. He can be left, he can be right, he can be orthodox, he can be reform, he can be conservative, he can be loving, he can even be tough sometimes. He could be any of those things. And he's really a mirror for you, someone once wrote. He's a big scholar and I have a high regard for him. But I wrote him back and I said, you got him halfway. I said, Shlomo took you to a window where you had two glasses. One was a mirror. And you would see yourself in the most beautiful, best possible light. And he empowered you to see how you can be shining. But through the other lens, he showed you a telescope that gave you a horizon beyond anything you could ever imagine. And lifted you up and to show you worlds and consciousness and spirits and visions and dreams and histories and futuristic ideas that are nowhere near anything you could have ever imagined.